This is WXRWLP. You're listening to River West Radio on WXRWLP. Do you want to support your community radio station? Here's your chance. From now until December 30th, River West Radio is participating in a nationwide fundraising effort for community broadcasters called Give Big to My Station. Your tax-deductible gift will help River West Radio continue to provide a platform for alternative and marginalized voices. Go to riverwestradio.com and click Give Big to My Station to make a one-time donation. Thanks for listening. This is Image for Hire. I'm the Scrouse. We'll be discussing all things imaginal and how you can use that imagination and activate it to hack reality. With me is Coe Douglas, a curator of fiction at Revelore Press, a rogue scholar and tarotologist. He's a Milwaukee native and fiery advocate for the imagination. Hello, Coe.
Hey, Scrouse. Thank
Thanks
you for
for
having
joining
me. Yeah.
Anytime, or every time. I hope anytime, sometime, again. First thing I'm going to do is, since you're a tarotologist, I'm going to shuffle these tarot cards.
Oh, great. All right. What's the question?
The question is, how can we make this episode awesome?
All right. I need to know that first.
3 cards. Okay, now I want you to read those. I drew looks like the Chariot.
You've got the Chariot, you've got the stars, and you've got the...
They're far away, I know. Let me move them closer.
Now we have the Knave of Wands. He's carrying the batons, so that's nice. All right. The Valet of Batons. Yeah, man, so what's the question again? Let's talk
Into
about
the mic. The question is... What was the question? The question is, how can we make this episode awesome?
All right, so... Here's what I see. So I would say, first of all, we have to get started. Get moving. We've got the Charioteer, right? So it's about movement, moving forward.
Of course.
So we got to go. We're already doing that. You got the star, pouring ourselves out. I think there's something to be said about being honest and not holding back, getting it all out. And then the last one, the baton, we're making something that's creative, crafted. So, we need to make sure whatever we make is beautiful and interesting. And I know you did a banish your ritual last time about boredom. So I think we got to... I think this tarot card, this reading is definitely one against boringness, so I think we're well on our way.
Yes, we'll keep it far away. Describe the cards a little bit. So what do we got there? What are those pictures of?
So the Charioteer we've got here is number 7, and that one you've got this...
number 7 of what?
It's just the 7 in the major arcana. So basically, to break it down, we've got the major and the minor. You're using a Marseille tarot deck, which this one probably is like a convert derivative, right? You've got several different... There's TDM1 and TDM2. The ones are like...
Really?
So the Tarot de Marseille ones are the older, so that's like the Dodal and the Noblet.
Okay.
I've got some of those. We can talk about that, but then this would be more like the converse. So, you have the 7, which is the Chariot, and the major arcana, which are the 22 cards. They're mostly the face cards. In the Marseille deck, you have also the minor arcana or the pips. So you have trumps and pips, and the pips are more like old playing cards. You've got suits, so you've got 4 different suits. You've got wands, you've got swords, you've got cups, and you've got coins. So here we have the major arcana. We've got the Chariot, and so he is actually harnessing these 2 horses. It's a lot like the Plato allegory of the Chariot, right? You've got this person on the chariot, a man with a crown and a staff who's...
Wait, there's a Plato allegory of a chariot?
Yeah, with 2 horses.
I haven't heard of this.
Yeah.
How does it go?
So basically, you've got the charioteer who's harnessing aspects of the mind, and I think it gets into... I'm not exactly sure of all the details on that. I believe it's about reason and intellect, but the gist of it is harnessing the mind in a certain direction. So
okay.
I think that it's not an accident that this comes out like this. But my interest in this one is this is a pretty good card. It suggests movement. It's not a very static card. He's looking right at us, so I think that's important. Sometimes they look left, look right, so he's facing us. It's sort of talking.
He's engaging the viewer right away.
Yeah, he's saying, "Scrouse, man, you need to get moving, move." And so I think that's a really cool card. Some of the details, the colors are vibrant. You got the star, which is, again, there's some duality. You've got 2 cups being poured out, one into the land, one into to the river.
Who's pouring them?
This goddess, she is sort of she is naked, unclothed, with a bird behind her in a tree, and you've got a bunch of stars. I've read in one of the books on the history, this star could be the North Star, if you look at some of the origin stories of these. But, to me, this one's about sort of abundance and about pouring oneself out, I think, not holding back. I mean, you got to remember, too, man. And then with the last one, the batons, the valet of the batons, he's holding up this sort of beautiful piece of wood that he's sizing up. And you got to remember that depending upon how you look at this, these meanings are all sort of general.
Right.
But they really are contained to I've heard people say, well, what do they mean? And I would say nothing if there's no question. The context of the question is going to set that up. We've talked a lot about that off air. And,
what if you just pick one without a question and lay it down?
I think it's beautiful. I think you could look at it and use it maybe creatively to inspire you to write something. But if you don't have a question, there's nothing to answer.
Right. Well, yeah, that makes sense. Sure.
But I mean, what I like is that if you put them together, it's kind of called the open reading method. People like Enriques, Camilia, Elias, who we both like.
Yeah, my heroes.
They would take that open reading method using the Marseille Tarot deck, and they talk mostly about how do they make a story? What's the narrative in it? And so that's how I would look at it, is what story are we telling here?
So we're telling the story of how to make this show awesome.
Yeah, that's right. This is the story of this show, man, forever. So
And we just get started and outpour, and we'll have...
be honest and don't hold back, man,
Oh, right.
And make it creative. And I think the last one is you've got this wand, this piece of wood, which could be really dull, or it could be crafted into something really beautiful. So I guess that's up to us.
Right. Well, here we go.
I was really struck by the boring thing last time. I thought that was important. And
well, I actually got that idea from you.
Oh, you did? Oh,
yeah.
That's right. We talked about that.
Yeah, we were talking about...
banishing boredom.
Yeah, instead of banishing things we don't like different political things or whatever. You said, why don't you just banish boring?
Yeah, that's right.
I thought that was genius.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you have it.
Why don't you tell us a little about yourself, where you came from, what you're doing here, how you ended up reading cards?
Yeah, well, they all kind of tie together. I am from Milwaukee. As you know, I grew up here. Left here when I was about 21 for college. Went to Birmingham, Alabama. Was going to be a medical sociologist.
Really?
Yeah, I was in a PhD program.
Wow.
Got a degree in sociology and minor in English.
Did you really?
Yeah. And then I was in this PhD program. But I'd always wanted to be a writer, and I was always spending most of my time writing. And I was less interested in medical sociology than I was telling stories in fiction. So I did what any aspiring writer would do. I quit grad school and got into basically started focusing on writing fiction and telling stories. And that led to me getting a job at an advertising agency, actually, as a copywriter. I interned at this agency and had basically 10 weeks to get them to to keep me. So I basically convinced them to keep me after 10 weeks. I got involved in a lot of projects and ended up staying at that shop for 10 years.
Wow.
And kind of learned how to be a writer. I thought I knew what it meant to be a writer, and I was always writing fiction and telling stories, and writing doing some journalistic stuff. I was covering the music scene in Birmingham for a while, what I realized was working in advertising is it put me around working with video, working with audio, sound, writing music, writing jingles. I got to meet a lot of filmmakers. Most cinematographers I worked with on commercials were also doing film stuff, documentary stuff. So I got to sort of learn about the broader extensions of the imagination beyond being just a fiction writer. And that was really, I think, one of the turning points in how I've approached everything I do, which is I've worked in film quite a bit, and I've written journalistic stuff, and I've done some music stuff, but all that sort of, the catalyst for that was getting into advertising and realizing there's all these ways to express oneself, right?
Right.
So from there, that took me all over the country. I lived in San Antonio, Texas, Chicago, North Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida, which is where I was before I came here. And while I was there, I was really involved in the lit scene.
The
literary
literature
scene, yeah. I was working on a literary magazine called Bridge 8. I was the founding managing editor, and it grew, and we did some great issues, got some really cool writers, people I had met at some writers' workshops around the country. We kind of early solicited, tried to build up sort of a reputation, launched a reading series called Abridged. But I kept thinking to myself that if I was going to do a lot of this kind of literary culture building, I kind of wanted to do it here in Milwaukee, which I've always loved.
Really?
I grew up here. I've always had a real fondness for Milwaukee when I'd visit. My dad's still here.
Sure.
And so when one day I was sitting in my office doing some work, writing, and I saw this video, that Dear Milwaukee video. I think I've told you that.
No, Dear Milwaukee?
Oh, it's this website, Dear Milwaukee. Actually, this Onion Films, Purple Onion Films, this guy Steve Farr did it, and I actually have met Steve, gotten to know him a little bit since then, but that was sort of that, watching that in conjunction with wanting to come home, I just thought, I'm just going to move back to Milwaukee and kind of take what I was working on with literature and lit mags and fiction stuff and try to apply that stuff here, which is what I've been working on.
Right, and develop a scene, make something happen.
Yeah, and there's a great scene here. I mean, there's a scene, there's some awesome writers. I mean, I kind of set out to reconnect with the city since I was gone so long.
Okay.
And so I started meeting some writers, and I started meeting some people at UWM and off UWM at Woodland Pattern and different places, and realizing there's quite a great scene, but it's sort of spread out. And one of the things that we've been working on quite a bit, myself and a couple other people, is this notion of Milwaukee has a really great film scene. Our film festival's fantastic. We've got a great music scene here. We've got, obviously, the art museum's fantastic. There's an art scene, and you're more deeply immersed in that than I am, but I kept wondering where the lit scene was, and it's here, but it's sort of spread out. So we're working on sort of trying to bring that all together, all these edges, over into Oak Creek and down into Bayview.
There's something going on in Oak Creek?
Yeah, I think there's a really cool writer studio kind of in West Allis.
Is it really?
No, it's in West Allis. It's called Red Oak Writers.
That's also weird.
She's wonderful, and it's wonderful, and
Really?
I've heard great things. But
What's the name of it?
Red Oak Writers.
Red Oak Writers?
Yeah, and I don't know her personally, but I hear it's fantastic. Guy I've been working with, Zachary, he knows her, and anyway, we've been trying to sort of bring all that together into in the cohesive space. We'd love to have more of a cohesive center for literary studies here, for fiction, poetry, filmmaking, screenwriters, that we
definitely
have a common sort of space so that we can kind of reach out and get more people telling stories, writing. I mean, you've got Exfabula, you've got Stillwater's Collective. There's all these groups. I know Zachary's connected with a few of them. My interest is more programming the fiction side of it, teaching writing classes. I was working on a thing called Wonderland Writer Studio when I met him, which was I was going to start teaching fiction and different types of classes, which I've done quite a bit of in the past. And
Sure.
Getting people who are interested in telling stories and don't know where to begin.
Did you actually have that going? Were you teaching classes?
No, I just was about to start when I met those guys, and I put it on hold because I thought if I'm going to do that again, I wanted to sort of work with sort of collaborative and kind of community building.
Right, work with them instead of separate and parallel.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, there should be no competition. We should all be working together.
Yeah. We all have these different ideas, different ways to approach things. We can put it together and do something awesome.
Yeah.
I always dream of a Studio 54, 57 in Milwaukee.
Yeah. Well, I want to bring
great?
the salons back. We want to get those going,
Oh,
too.
right.
Like
Salons.
Yeah, I imagine during the Belle Epoque or during the time of the Surrealists, all those guys hanging out and
Right, and making things happen.
making things happen. I think there's a collective energy that comes out of all that. I think there's like a feedback loop. Everything feeds onto itself, and there's this critical mass of
Sure, as long as we're
imagination.
excited, we could do something exciting and draw people like a magnet.
Yeah, and there's a lot of. I mean, since I've been back, I've been amazed. There's so many really creative people here who have great ideas and who are doing cool stuff. And I mean, I've just been sort of trying to engage as many people as I can, and I've always come away feeling really sort of inspired by what I've been seeing. I mean, look, we met in a strange way at a coffee shop. And,
Yeah.
we were doing some of the same kind of stuff, and now we're.
That's,
I remember
well,
you
it
talking
wasn't
about
strange at all. I was reading, what's his name?
John D.
Yeah. Wait, what's
No,
his
you were reading about John D. You were
about
reading-
John D by, what's his name?
Was it Lon Milo?
Yeah, Lon Milo Duquette.
That's funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought if this dude's reading this really obscure book and no one else would be reading, I figured we should be friends. So.
Well, exactly. Who knows? Tell us about John D.
Oh man, you probably know more about John than I do. I mean, I know he was at the time. He was the most learned man in England at the time, right? He had this massive library. He
He had the biggest library.
Yeah, he was also a spy for the Queen.
Yeah.
He's the originator of the 007.
He is. He used to sign his letters, 007.
Yeah. And he also was an astrologer, magician, traveled.
Yeah.
And he's the guy who worked. The legend is actually his scrying. It's what's it made out of?
Obsidian, yeah.
Yeah. A scrying mirror is in the British National Museum, but he used
cool.
that with a dude named Edward Kelly, who I believe was a bit of a con man.
Possibly.
And they got together and came up with this whole alphabet they claimed was given to them
By angels.
Yeah. But
Yeah, it's called Enochian.
yeah, but it's pretty complex and it's pretty profound and it's stuck around. I mean,
And with the alphabet comes an entire system of contacting and working with the angels.
that's right. Yeah, and people still work with it, and there's been a million books written on it. And
Yeah.
I actually know very little about that. I find it I haven't cracked that. You know, you have to sort of focus somewhere on.
You do.
Something.
There's so many branches to magic. You have to focus on something.
Those rabbit holes run deep.
How'd you choose what to focus on in your own?
I mean, for me,
first of all, how did you even discover it and decide? Wait a minute, this isn't just crackpot nonsense. This is something I can actually look into.
Well, and there's some crackpot in some of that, but I feel like to me, I mean, I was always a guy that was interested in being creative and using my imagination. That's why I got into when I worked in advertising as a creative director writer, I was more interested in the ideas than actually being interested in being an ad person. I was more like kind of rogue in that regard because my thing was I got to be creative every day, and I got to write and make TV commercials and radio and create campaigns, and I liked the challenge of this applying imagination to a strategy. But so at that time though, I was reading pretty widely, and I kind of got into probably Gnosticism first, and it's like that typical quest. I actually went down. I was in Birmingham at the time, and I just I was always read widely, and I think I came across might have even been like Holy Blood, Holy Grail, or one of those kind of wild books that probably came out. The Da Vinci Code. Yeah, which, it's kind of like terrible fiction. Oh yeah, that's what it was. And in grad school in my MFA program, we would make fun. A lot of people make fun of Dan Brown, but it was it's one of those kind of like guilty pleasure reads.
Sure.
But I think that's what kind of sent me down that path.
And that was basically a popularization of Holy Blood, Holy Grail, exactly. Right?
But I mean, at that point though, for me, it's like you start looking at this stuff, and you could take something like tarot cards. I think what made that really come alive to me is at first there was like it's something you see in a lot of films, and it's usually the Rider-Waite Smith deck, which is cool and interesting, and it has some roots. It's actually based on the Marseille Tarot and also probably some of that Solabusca deck that we've talked about.
Possibly.
Especially some of the minor arcana. But what's interesting about, for me, so there was something sort of intriguing about the imagery. They're very arresting, and as someone who is a writer who tries to write visually and who's had some interest in working in film, the images really captured me. But then I always, something I played around with, but when I discovered the Marseille Tarot, which was really through my interest. I loved Aljondro Jodorowski's films.
Oh yeah, he's wonderful.
So I read his book Way of the Tarot, and he approaches it from a very depth psychological standpoint and dives into the archetypal aspects and meaning of it, and for personal development. But I kept looking at, I kept seeing it in storytelling devices, right? So as a writer, every time you see those laid down, you'd say, well, there's a story there. And actually, Italio Calvino, who's a great novelist, he has a fantastic collection of stories called The Castle of Crossed Destinies, where every story is based on tarot spreads.
Yeah, and it's similar to the Decameron, where they're all in a bar, and each person tells a story.
Yeah, and they lose their voice, so they have to. So they magically lose their voice first in, I think, like an old castle, and the second time's a tavern. Right. And basically, they've got to fight, and they're all kind of scrambling to get a hold of these cards and lay them down to share with the other people what brought them to this point.
Wow!
And it's a really wonderful device, but also that's something I think a lot about is. It's a really, and I've worked with people. I've worked with some writers on this, especially if you're stuck, because for not I know some of the best writers I know, they struggle with generating ideas for stories, and for me, you can lay down 3-4 cards and you've got basically the beginnings of a narrative, character development, and it works. It works really, really well, and it's something that I kind of like to play around with. And if I get stuck, if you hit a wall, you can even do a reading for a character within a story, right? You can use it for scene setting, place, tone. Backstory.
Yeah,
it's nice, man.
It has that great element of randomness.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, the whole notion, like Enriques, he'll say the whole idea of little pieces of square paper with images on.
Yeah,
it's an absurd idea,
right?
But for some reason, it seems to work, and I think what works about it is that it helps one reach some meaning and gain some meaning. And to me, it's more about the present. I mean, I don't worry about the past and the future. I have a hard enough time sort of making sense of the present sometimes.
Well, I hear that too, but you can influence the present through the cards, or the future.
Yeah, probably. I think so. I mean, I think a lot of what happens in the future has got its seeds right now in the present, right?
Right. So, I mean, in one way, you can read the future by giving yourself something to aim at.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's just a fantastically interesting thing to mess around with if you like creative things. And we've talked a lot about just as a device for generating stories, and that's kind of my main interest. But I, coming at it from like a more surrealist standpoint, it's just fun to see what'll fall. It's all chance, right?
Well, is it?
Maybe not. I don't know.
I mean, our life Our life is the story we're generating every day. So it'd be nice to break through some of the writer's block. Sometimes.
Well, that's a good tool for writer's block. I mean, that's something, like I said, I've got friends who are writers who struggle mightily with that. It's interesting. One of the unintended consequences of working in advertising is it made me pretty good at avoiding that, because I kind of had to write every day and be creative for a living. So I didn't really have the luxury of not coming up with things. So it really
that's
helped
a luxury, eh?
Yeah, I mean, you
It's
can't
a
just
crippling
show up.
luxury.
You can't show up in front of a creative director and say, "I know I had 2 days to come up with this TV campaign. I got nothing."
Yeah,
it's
true.
just not acceptable. So you had to find ways to get around that.
What did you do?
For me, it was usually change place, go to coffee shops,
okay.
cafes.
Sure.
Used to have a guitar in my office. That would always help. Just anything that would sort of get my mind off. Nowadays, I guess you might go online and check some videos on YouTube. Yeah, anything that sort of, I think, shifts your perspective. I think it can get you back. I mean, to me, a lot of idea generation happens when I'm indirectly thinking about things.
Right.
I mean, if you're not, it's usually doing its work in the background. You know what I mean? The imaginal is happening.
Yeah,
you
sure.
onboard an idea, and then it works itself out. A lot of times, it just sort of spits out.
Yeah, but how can you wait for that? You have to figure out a way to make it spit out on command.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. Those are fun exercises. You're sitting in a MF. Well, you did art. I did an MFA in creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting in a workshop, and it's like, okay, everyone's got. Here's an image. Now write a story. What do you do?
Whoa.
Right.
Oh, that would be awesome. Yeah.
It's great.
It's easy to do.
It's a fun challenge.
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
But that's where you've got to really, I think, you talk about the star card, right? We'll go back to the star card. You've got to give yourself permission to let that stuff pour out of you. I think a lot of younger writers struggle with being honest and just letting come out what wants to come out. We measure too much. We're too afraid to express ourselves freely in our writing. Right?
Well, what are we afraid of? What are we dishonest about?
I think exposing ourselves, being vulnerable. I think letting stuff out, being too concerned with being measured. I mean, I think sometimes you've got to be really raw on the page and let the best stuff come out.
The demand to be good.
Not to mention the fact that you're always going to edit.
Right.
I mean,
but you don't think of that.
I'm always astonished nowadays. I see these people who they want to spit stuff out, but I mean, a lot of the best aspects of writing come in the craft of writing and in the aspects in revision and refining.
Right.
And
definitely. Even to the point where if I refine a story, I'll notice that a paragraph from the beginning belongs at the end.
Yeah.
But if I didn't write the whole story, I never would have found that. Right.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of times, I mean, some of my favorite stories have started off in very different places. Things I've written, they start off in very different places. And, just through spending time with them, they radically transform themselves into something much better. So if you just kind of stop and think you're done, I think you miss out on some of the richer stuff.
So the strategy then is to just keep writing without
Always,
judgment.
Yeah, man. Keep creating, keep thinking.
Yeah. Constantly. And that becomes a discipline. Speaking of discipline, how did we jumped off track from your journey into magic? Oh,
well, no. So yeah.
So we got as far as Holy Blood, Holy Grail.
Well, it's funny because that idea. I mean, I was really into Zen Buddhism. Mm-hmm. I guess it's funny. I went down to Birmingham, Alabama, and lost religion probably because
in the Bible Belt.
Yeah, I was in the Bible Belt, and I grew up here in Milwaukee, and it wasn't a big part of my life, and so I got really interested in. I'm inherently a curious person, and so I like to read all over the place. And I think I came across some books on Zen Buddhism and got into that, and got into yoga and different things, especially Vedanta. And so all those things are sort of more esoteric, inwardly focused. Mm-hmm. And if you listen to Carl Jung, talks about the notion that there's a lot of those same journeys in the West for the Western psyche, and I don't think that's as applicable nowadays as maybe it was when he was thinking about it, because I think there's some really powerful ideas in the East, but it just made me start thinking about what are the Western equivalents of Vedanta and yoga and that idea of unitive consciousness, and you start finding them in in the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, or you finding them in some of the older Interior Castle, and some of these pieces are about sort of this unitive mind. And then you get into beyond that, you start looking at at some point, anybody who's curious, who's looking at the esoteric, discovers like Alistair Crowley,
Yeah,
who
definitely.
when I was a kid was just nothing more than that Ozzy Osbourne song,
Oh, right.
with Randy Rhoads, which I loved. But I think that stuff all is something that a lot of my friends who are artists and creatives are all drawn to anyway. That kind of ways to bend how we think. You always end up sort of in Robert Anton Wilson as well, probably reading him. One of the
Okay.
first books I read was Prometheus Rising.
Really?
Oh yeah, and those about what the thinker thinks the prover proves, and it gets you thinking about mind and consciousness and how to maybe reshape it.
Reshape mind and consciousness?
Yeah, and how you think about the world. I mean, questioning that stuff, and that's kind of what leads you down those.
Which is essentially the world itself, recreating the world.
Yeah.
Right. We're talking about Robert Anton Wilson's idea of the reality tunnel.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, and then from there, it's if I could backtrack, I'm sure that if I looked at the order in which I was buying books at the time, it probably ended up in
right.
Isreal, Regardie, and Golden Dawn, and
Yeah,
Alistair Crowley, and Crowley would have taken you down through into like probably chaos magic,
Uh-huh.
and you get down into this modern day times, and here we are, and all that stuff has value, but it's all about, to me, like it's sort of a refining, and a stripping away of some of the needless stuff. Like you get
In yourself?
I think in general, I think just how that stuff's evolved, like magical thinking. I mean, I think this notion of like, for me, what that's about is they're all ways to become a more creative person. A lot of it's about, I think, attention and focus and being attentive to ideas. I think if you're fully immersed in any project, there's something magical about that. Like Crowley would have said,
Oh, right.
every
Yeah.
intentional act is a magical act, right? And there's a lot wrong with Crowley, but I think he was definitely committed to art and being creative, and that's something that was that's sort of what I got out of that as a writer and as a creator. That was what was important to me.
Well, he was definitely committed. What he said, he did 100% without looking back.
Right. Yeah, and that's how I look at it, and that's kind of what I take away from that, I guess, is all that. I mean, like sigil stuff. You talked about that last week. I mean, with Astralize.
Right.
And that stuff's fantastic, man. I mean, there's a lot of value in working with those types of images and taking words and condensing them into meaningful shapes that can sort of hack your unconscious and unfold within your unconscious to achieve something. There's those things. I've had success with that kind of stuff,
Oh, cool.
and it's they're fun tools, and I think they're all in that same toolbox.
Yeah, it's very interesting. The sigil magic is a mixture of words and pictures.
Yeah.
Well, tarot doesn't have any words. It's got the pictures, I suppose. But the idea of putting thoughts together through imagery.
Yeah. That's right. And so,
Yeah, so then you turn to the tarot at some point with interest.
well, I got more interested probably after I started looking at it as a storytelling tool. I mean, that was more interesting to me, and I just started messing around with them more and more. And I think, to me, again, it's there's a logic to it. There's something very beautiful. I think like one of my favorite, I would say, readers of tarot and writers is Enriques. He's in New York. There's a documentary about him called Tarology, which
you
is
mentioned
fantastic.
him earlier. So, I'm sorry,
Tarology.
Tarology is the documentary.
Yeah.
What is his... He said that the cards mean nothing by themselves. You have to read them in order or in placement in relation to a question.
Yeah, and I mean, I think he would say that they have no meaning unless they're being read in a story. And I think he would also probably say it's all quite inherently absurd. I think he finds that they work, and I think for him I think he would say that they're a way to help people achieve meaning if you have a question. And I think inevitably, even if you sit with the cards long enough, anybody can arrive at some answers. And sometimes those answers might be beyond words. We've got to put them into words, but I think sometimes
That's
you can
true.
probably extract more just from looking at them than having to fumble around with the imprecision of language.
Right, if you just let them stay in the subconscious. And
Yeah, but he's
Work
a blast, and he's a lot. I've worked with him a little bit on some stuff, and his insights, I think, are about, he's a poet, so they're a poetic tool.
Oh, yeah, very good. Does he use them to write poetry?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes, he does.
nice.
Anyway, that's kind of what I get out of it, and that's where I think my evolution was. It was one of those things where I think it was like a slow evolution, a slow growth, so to speak, because I wasn't like all in and then sort of faded. Over time, they've just sort of become more and more meaningful and important to how I how I work, and I do like reading them. I think it's a lot. I think there's a lot. I get a lot of meaning out of them. I think that there's something inherently powerful about the images. They're very archetypal to me, and depending upon the deck, I really like the old Noble. They're smaller, they're older, they're from
Okay, what's the difference between that's a different Marseille deck?
All right, so I will speak specifically about the one I like, which is the one by Noble from 1650. It was actually, they were restored. The deck I have was restored by a guy named Jean-Claude Flournoy. Beautiful, and his wife Roxanne. He passed away a few years ago. His wife runs this website. I think it's called Tarot History. But it's smaller. They're smaller cards. They're a little more raw. The images, I think, are a little more evocative. And if you compare them to some of the other decks, like the one, like the Conover that you have, or the Dodal, there's these different decks. I think that you see subtle differences. Jodorowski's deck has some differences in them.
Right.
He's messed around with them. He claims that he actually took all the old decks and restored them to their original esoteric meaning. I think I think historians think that's a leap at best. But I mean, again, does it matter if it means something to you and it works for you?
Well, right. I mean, you could even use the James Bond deck from that movie where he's in Louisiana. Do you remember which one I'm talking about?
No.
I can't remember the name of the movie.
Oh, I know the deck you're talking about.
Yeah. I heard it on a podcast.
I know. I've heard that same podcast.
That's a great podcast.
Yeah, that's a great podcast.
No, the Marseille deck, there's a thing in it called pips. Are the suit cards also called pips?
No, those are called... You mean
like the King, Queen,
Those
Knight?
are all pips, yeah, but those are the court cards.
The court cards.
Yeah. It's interesting because I used to be terrified of those. I would avoid those.
Because they're
78 cards and you've got the 22 major.
And there's no pictures on them.
Right. But I found that if you know how to look at them, they're actually a little more exciting than the major arcana with the faces, because depending upon how you approach them, they because they lack shape, they allow the imagination to do more heavy lifting. So you're looking with basically with numbers and with symbols, like I said, batons and swords.
Do the symbols have a fixed meaning?
I don't. Well, there is some, and that's where I think it would differ. And what's interesting about that is the way, say, someone like Enriques would read it. I like his approach to it. Is you'd say the coins and the cups are more intimate and warmer, right? They're red. They'd be kind of in symbolically red, warmer. Okay. Usually, as a coin would be held in hand, a cup you'd fill with something and hold closer, and where swords and batons are more at a distance, you hold them away from your body.
And for keeping things distant.
Yeah. But, if you look at it like that way, and then you start looking at the numbers and saying that increases in numbers are about expansion, decreases are about contraction, and you throw that into that with, depending upon the different warming and cooling ideas, so these basic principles, I think you could apply that to almost anything, dude. Maybe even coins. Even like little
flipping a coin?
Maybe. I don't know. We should try it. That would be a good experiment.
Yeah.
I thought about trying to spend a whole week of my life completely basing that on what came out of this, on just like readings and just do everything.
You haven't done that yet?
Where I'd end up.
What's taking you so long? You mean like should I turn left or right?
Myself in trouble, huh?
No, you could.
Might do it for a day to start off with.
All right. Well, every decision you make.
Yeah. Well, I do want to write. I mean, I have written fiction like that, and it ends up being kind of interesting because it takes you in some some pretty wild places depending upon what you get. I mean, what do you do with the tower? What do you do with the devil, the hanged man?
Yeah.
I mean, from a story standpoint, how do you stay in that period, or do you modernize those, and how do you take those ideas and bring them into the modern context and use them for like maybe a story set in the late 20th, early 21st century?
You would do it the same way you do it for a modern reading right now for your life, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Which, brings us to that idea of like enchantment, right? We talk a lot about the notion of enchantment and ideas, imagination. I mean, that's something that I think is the larger idea of writing, telling stories, fiction. There's something very enchanting about being able to tell a story and see it come to life in a piece of fiction, right? That someone reads, hopefully, and participates in the bringing to life this narrative, right? Because you're going to fill in the blanks, the colors, the place, the stuff that I've omitted. So when you read something I've written, for example, or I read something like a piece of literature that I love, then what happens is that is participatory. I love the fact that when I'm reading, what have I read recently? I'm actually getting ready to read Shirley Jackson. Okay. So when I start reading that, I'll be participating in creating the world that's in between those pages.
Sure. And how does that relate again to enchantment? And
Well, that's an enchanted thing into itself, right? You're bringing something into it. I think there's something kind of magical about this idea of taking something on a page, and it becomes illuminated in the imagination when you read the words, right?
it does, and there's something fascinating about the fact that an invented world can affect me more emotionally than the world I'm living in every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we love art, right? That's why it endures.
Right.
All
Yeah.
art, I don't know, but I mean, obviously, if you really look at the stuff that I like to look at, it's always stirs me and always, I think, changes
that's why
me.
we like to look at it. Although a lot of people like to look at pictures of barns, and I don't understand that. I suppose the emotional connection is to nature, something pastoral. So they have that emotional connection to the land.
Right.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, actually. Hey, let's take a musical break.
Yeah.
All right, what do you got for us?
I don't know. What do you have? What was that you were playing at the beginning there?
Oh, that
What were
was
those sounds?
the broadcast coming out of Jupiter as recorded by the satellite Juno. There's frequencies shooting out of the North Pole of Jupiter. Yeah, you want to hear it again?
Yeah.
Okay, it's coming on shortly. Oh, cuts off suddenly. I love the terror of that. To me, that sounds like old school science fiction.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's amazing how the planet is actually making that noise.
Right. I wonder what it's saying. What do you take from that?
Yeah, what could it be saying? It is Jupiter. You
Right.
should probably pay attention.
That's right. Why did you pick Jupiter, man? What was the reason for that? Was that intentional?
That's the only planet that I know they've recorded.
nice. Nice.
Yeah, it's like a whale song. Terrifying, in a terrifying science fiction vein.
Right. Yeah, so yeah, I guess that's how I approach all of that, and I don't know. It's something I spend a lot of time on when I'm not working on like the press stuff that I've been working with.
Oh yeah. Tell us about the press stuff. Tell us about Revelore. You're the curator of fiction at
Revelore. Yeah, Revelore is fantastic. So Revelore is a new press. It was founded by Jen Zart, who is an astrologer and a writer and a fantastic. She was involved with another press previously, and they put out this great series called Verdant Gnosis, and she's put out
Verdant Gnosis.
Verdant Gnosis, which is sort of about plant magic and herbalism, and then she was involved in that Cyprian series, Cipriano New World and Old World, and they were both anthologies working with Saint Cyprian, who's the patron saint of magic and sorcery, and he came back and has become kind of all the rage. Everyone's like buying those statues
now.
and
He's the most ironic of all saints and of all magical
He was
heroes.
a magician who fell in love with a woman named, I think, Justina, and converted to Christianity and then was murdered. I think he
because
was martyred.
her Christianity was more powerful than his magic.
Yeah, so he's really popular. But anyway, it's a really fantastic collection of essays. And so she worked on that previous with another press and left that press and started Revelore, which is Revel in Lore. Revelore, really, I think the name's great. And she reached out to me and said, I want to go beyond where we were with her previous press, which was more, I think, esoteric publishing, and she wanted to really get more into consciousness studies and books on philosophy, and then also fiction and storytelling and narrative. And so
with an esoteric background or bent?
Any fiction. I mean, she pretty much said, do what you want. And so what I'm interested in is sort of that liminal sort of boundary crossing
sure, like
sort of
Murakami or Kelly Link.
William Gibson, Philip K. Dick.
William Gibson.
Not necessarily full on like dystopia, but I want stuff that's magically real. Could be occult fiction. I love Dion Fortune's fiction, and I love.
I've heard she's good.
I love Crowley's fictions, and I love.
Crowley wrote fiction?
Oh, he's wrote great fiction. Yeah,
I had no idea.
Oh yeah, pretty strange. And then also like I'm a fan of like anything magical, like magically real or surreal, absurd. So yeah, that's kind of what we're looking at. But we actually when I got involved, I reached out to a couple of former professors in my MFA program, and one of whom who's one of my favorite writers. His name is Stefan Kiesbo, and he's I think he was described as sort of the inventor of modern German Gothic horror fiction, and he's writes in English, professor in California. But I mentioned I was doing this press, and I just said, hey, if anything comes across your desk and you know of anything. We're looking to get our first book. I had some anthology ideas, and about 2 weeks later, he sent me his latest novel. It's called Berlingeles, and it's this really fantastic sort of semi-dystopian sort of cyberpunk tale. It's in a walled-in city of Los Angeles. There's a 93 or 94-year-old protagonist named Kay.
Oh, cool.
There's limb transplants and
Nice.
assassins and an underworld with this kind of crazy messiah named Chariot. And they play this game called Chariot's Game, and it's
Which Revelore is recreating.
we're gonna have some recreations of it. Yeah, that's gonna be coming out, and it's just an absolutely fantastic book for it to come our way and have a chance to bring it out. We've got this really fantastic illustrator and designer in Seattle, and so it's coming together. It'll be out in June. It'll be our first release,
Wow.
probably before that even, I think. But we're trying to have it like early summer.
Okay.
And then we've got a couple other projects, an anthology project, and maybe a translation project. Those are still in the works. But there's a couple of pieces of Spanish Gothic fiction that have never been translated into English that we want to.
Spanish Gothic.
Yeah, there was like a early 20th century sort of movement, a couple
Oh.
writers, and it's sort of dark, churchy, demonic, possessed characters.
That's
and
great.
It's very wonderful stuff, but a lot of it's never been brought into English yet. So I've got a translator, a friend who lives in Spain, and we're gonna work on it together actually, and do
Wow.
a translation project.
That's awesome.
So hopefully that will all
Because-
come together.
You speak Spanish yourself,
I do.
so you could do it. That's fabulous.
I mean, I would like to. Yes, I would feel comfortable. But I think partnering with my friend who's studies Spanish literature, we'll make sure we sort of get both. Going both ways. I mean, making sure the translations are accurate and then making sure they sound beautiful in English. I think we
Right.
can work together.
that's a hard.
And it's gonna be
combo.
it'll be a daunting task, but I think it'll be worth it. But yeah, so that's Revelore, and I would say I urge people to check it out. It's revolore.press. There's a lot of stuff coming out. It'll be I think it's going to be a fun journey to work with those guys, and lots of big stuff planned. So, and it'll be nice because, I'll be doing my part of it here in Milwaukee, and hopefully that'll help contribute to sort of our lit scene as well. And
What do you mean your part? You're editing.
my part
Or-
is the editor of
Curator.
fiction. I'll be doing that part here in Milwaukee, and
All right.
hopefully we can it just adds to another. We've got some great presses here. Revelore might be based in Seattle, but the fiction part of it
Oh.
finds its home here. So
That's perfect. That's
Yeah.
perfect.
and I think it's important that we continue to cultivate that kind of stuff. I mean, we've got
In
really-
Milwaukee, you mean, or in
yeah,
general?
small presses and all the
Oh.
indie presses here, and I think again, like continue to build that movement of. I mean, we have this great this history, right? We've got Robert Bloch wrote Psycho here
right,
down on
right,
Brady
right.
Street above the old Gloriosos. And,
Yeah.
which is weird because so probably around that time, my grandfather owned a grocery store right
Yeah?
on Brady Street, right across the street. So I
What?
like to imagine it was called Douglas Food. I like to imagine that maybe Robert Bloch bought like Wonder Bread or something there.
Yeah.
Made a sandwich.
He must have.
when he was working on Psycho.
Yeah.
That's my
Your
my story.
grandfather fueled Psycho.
Maybe.
Wow.
Yeah, maybe some canned goods. I don't know.
Right.
But,
Something.
But then we had
Butterfinger.
like the Milwaukee Fictioneers, which was Bloch and these other writers,
that-
and Raymond
Oh,
Palmer. It
that's
was
right,
a bunch of
that's
writers.
right.
I think in the late 30s, but and then Raymond Palmer went on to.
Was Raymond Palmer wasn't from Milwaukee though?
I think he was. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Was he?
I believe so.
Raymond Palmer, and he edited.
I think Amazing Stories.
Amazing
right?
Stories,
Amazing
yeah.
Tales, and then he also was involved in what was the other one? He was Fate magazine.
Fate magazine, and he's also the character, the DC Comics character, the Adams civilian name is Ray Palmer, named after
Oh yeah, there you
Raymond
go.
Palmer.
That's a nice. And then I think those guys were also connected to August Derleth, of course, who was an early publisher of Lovecraft. Who
Oh,
was
yeah,
here in
yeah,
Wisconsin
of
with
course.
Arkham House. So we have this great sort of kind of weird fiction backstory.
We do. We have a weird fiction heritage.
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to bring it
We
back.
need to bring that back, and that's
Yeah.
hopefully what we can do with Revelore, and maybe get some of these other publishers to publish more.
Right.
I mean, it's funny because in grad school, like when I was doing that, like, every semester I'd have to read a ton of books, and
Yeah.
I read a lot of the stuff you're supposed to read,
Right.
and that's fine, and a lot of
Yeah.
that stuff was wonderful. And then sometimes I'd push the edge of that and get into like whether it was like I don't know, like something that was a little more dystopian or speculative, and
Sure.
and now I mean that's what I mostly read. I mean, like people like Victor Laval, like The Ballad of Black Tom, right? I mean, that was fantastic.
heard
It
of
was
this.
a retelling of the Cthulhu mythos through the eyes of an African American blues musician in the 20s in Harlem, and it's just fantastic. And
That does
Victor
sound
Laval
fantastic.
wrote The Changeling, and he wrote Devil in Silver, and he's this fantastic writer. And or whether it's like I don't know, there's all those dystopian books that came out last year, like or a couple of years ago, like California and Station 11, and anything that bends Philip K. Dick. I always go back and reach into that.
Mm-hmm.
You know. And I think that stuff's more interesting. I mean, modern American fiction, at least for me.
It's way more interesting. It's more imaginative.
Right. Yeah. I'm less interested in like the lives of
20-year-old
hipsters
New
in
Yorkers?
Brooklyn or something.
Yeah, yeah.
Although
Exactly.
like I've read great books like that as well. But I mean, if I have limited hours and limited time, I want to read stuff that really dazzles me and surprises me.
Yeah, and takes you
astonishes
somewhere
me.
else. Takes you into possibilities.
Right.
There's no way you can discover possibilities if you're just reading stories that are the same as your life.
Right. Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Excellent. Let's do a reading. Let's ask the tarot deck something. Bring out one of your decks.
What do you want to ask it, man? What does Strauss want?
We couldn't hear you because you're not in the mic. Coe asked me, what does Strauss want to know? I want to know how we can bring back the... We should have like a magic Milwaukee realism. Milwaukee realism.
Fiction, you mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like a fiction movie?
What's our fiction movement going to be? How do we get that going?
First of all, I was thinking about like we need more books. We need more stories set in Milwaukee. First of all, and I'm not
Well, have you noticed Milwaukee doesn't even have a song?
right.
Appalachia, Florida has a song.
There is that one from back in the day that Channel 12 did. Remember those? The Channel 12 Loves You one.
No, what's that?
Well, there was that one that ended up being talked about. Other cities did it, but there's that it's the feeling in the air that you can't get anywhere but Milwaukee. You know that song, right?
No, I don't
Yeah.
remember it.
We should find it. We probably can't play it on the air, but
Oh, that's right. We can't
it's
even probably sing it.
as a kid I was like in love with that song. It was like super
it-
nostalgic. I still listen to it once in a while.
Do
but,
you on YouTube? Do you?
Yeah.
It's the Channel 12. Is it their theme? Like,
I think
is
it's
their anthem.
yeah, what's the ending is Channel 12 Loves You, but it's all about how great Milwaukee is. You should watch it if you've never seen it, man. You'll love it.
Okay, I'm gonna look that up.
It's
Channel
magnificent.
12.
But
It's called Channel
that's a
12 Loves
song.
You.
But I think that there aren't any like pop or rock songs, right? That I'm aware of.
And no jazz standards either.
No. Yeah, we got to work on that. All right. So what's the
But
question?
Absolutely. The question is, how do we get a creative movement going in Milwaukee?
All right, let's see
A world-changing one, right? Like we want something on the level of South America's magical realism.
Oh, okay. And that's the kind of storytelling we want to have.
Yeah, basically, but only Milwaukee-fied. What's the Milwaukee addition to that? The Milwaukee mutation of that. Ooh. Oh, yeah. Look at these drawings.
So we
Yeah.
get Judgment, we get
Uh-oh.
La Mort, which is death, which
Wow.
is the 13th card,
Yeah.
and we get Temperance, right?
Okay, describe these cards a little bit.
Right.
What
So
are these
Judgment
pictures?
is exactly what it sounds like. You've got the angel up in the sky. So you got to remember these cards were being developed in a time when Christianity dominated Europe. So these all have a lot of Christian imagery on them.
Yeah, they're all
contrary to what
medieval.
People might. And so you've got Judgment, which is this menacing angel with a horn, with a
Yes.
flag sticking out. Looks like the flag of some Scandinavian country. And these,
It's a flag with a blue cross.
basically these two people praying as someone is resurrected. So we're resurrecting, literally.
Wait, aren't they all coming out of coffins?
I think two are praying as
Oh.
someone's rising from the coffin, right?
Yeah,
So you got
okay,
three
sure.
people, but you got this person with their back turned rising.
All right.
And it doesn't look like a head. It looks like there's a donut on someone's shoulder.
There's a
It's
donut on their
strange-
shoulder?
It looks pretty strange, right? So
Oh,
anyway,
yeah.
I think ultimately that's about resurrecting, right? We got to.
It's like not even a head.
I think that because I think that we're talking about the Fictioneers, right? So that already existed. We just got to resurrect that spirit. That was
Yeah.
all the strange stories. Bring that back. Maybe resurrect the publication.
Well, how
like
do we
that.
contact that spirit? Is it in Milwaukee? Is it native to the land? Is it
Maybe.
because of the immigration?
Maybe.
What created it?
Maybe we need to actually start doing some. We need to banish. We need to banish terrible fiction first of all,
Well, okay, we could start with that. Yeah.
and we need to invoke.
Yes.
which is another thing you could have done when you did your banishing ritual. You could have done an invoking.
That's true. You have to, because if you banish something, what's going to fill its place?
You have to fill that empty space,
That's
that
right.
empty cup. You have to invoke something new, right? And then you have La Mort, which is death. So now that as we resurrect, we've got this thing sweeping away these skulls. Those are the bones of boring writers.
Yes.
Right? And
sweeping them
people
away
with no
with
imagination writing about stuff that
this
no
is
one
a
likes.
picture of a creature that's half skeleton, half human. He's not quite
and
all
he's got
bones.
He's kind of the Grim Reaper, right? But he doesn't have his black robe.
Right.
But I mean, that's a card. I mean, if you get into it, that's really about change, right? For anything new to happen, something has to die.
That's true.
That rite of passage, that change of state from one state to another. So
that's what Star Wars was all about.
And then you've got Temperance, which is this angelic creature, kind of like the one in Judgment, coming back.
Oh,
and
you're
she's
right.
Sort of pouring water between these two vases. So she's mixing up this new concoction, man. It looks like she's a bartender making a drink.
Hey, and she's also that's a trump card, and she's her counter in the trump cards would be Temperance. No, wait, that's Temperance.
Yeah.
What's the one that we had with the pouring the water?
Oh,
on
that
the
was
land?
the star. Very similar.
Star.
Right,
Yeah.
It's a similar
So it
card.
involves water and 2 cups.
Yeah, and that comes actually right after death. So literally in the succession of cards, you've got 13 and then 14. So yeah.
Really?
So I think that is about resurrecting what already sort of was working.
Oh.
Right?
We have to do some work then. We got to figure out what that was. Part of that was probably August Derleth, although he's not technically from Milwaukee.
It's marvelously enchanted, reality bending tales,
Yeah. Unrestrained imagination.
A dystopian story set in Milwaukee that has magical realism throughout it. There you go. That's a start.
I could start it for sure, yeah.
And then, Temperance is interesting because you've got the pouring. I think they're mixing up some sort of concoction, right?
Oh,
Where
yeah.
They're mixed. It's not
pouring
it hasn't yet.
from one cup to another.
What's funny is they're all looking backwards, too. You got to look at where they're looking, right?
Okay, so
Death is looking at judgment. Temperance is looking back at death. Everyone's looking backwards. They're looking back
what's
at that
Judgment
resurrection.
looking at?
Judgment is looking straight at us.
Whoa!
So they're looking. She's looking at you, Scrouse. Maybe you need to be. You need to be one of those. You need to light that match, man.
All right. So wait.
Maybe it's actually happening right now.
It could be.
Maybe it just got lit.
But this could be the lighting of it.
Maybe.
Okay, so we got Judgment staring us in the face, Death looking at Judgment, and Temperance looking at
Yep.
Death. So they're all looking back towards
Right.
Judgment.
Yeah.
So does that mean we have to separate the wheat and the chaff, so to speak? Like,
Well, I mean,
make
I
the
think.
cut?
Well, I think so too. But also, that is also what maybe Judgment or the Death is about, right? Separating the wheat from the chaff, and also
so those
we're
cards
not-
are similar.
We're not reinventing the wheel, man. All stories have been told. We're just finding a fresh way to tell. them.
Right. We're bringing it back. So we lost it at some point.
Right. Yeah, we're resurrecting it. Because, I mean, again, that's part of what I think we're trying to do right now here is find those people that want to participate in that.
Excellent. So we need imaginative people to unite.
And they're out. I mean, dude, I meet people like that all the time. So there are some pretty fantastic people. You're one of those people.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Glad to be part of it. You got another one there?
No, that one's just... You never know. But
No,
no one's looking. Everyone's looking, yeah.
Did
so-
you only shuffled the trump cards? You didn't use any pips?
Not this time. No,
Okay.
I thought I'd stick with those. You could. You could even do just pips. It just depends.
Whoa, that sounds daunting.
But so there's our answer.
I think that's a pretty good answer. Judgment, sweep away the death, and move on.
Yeah. So that's our task, right, for next time. And that's something we're going to be working on, so
Yeah, definitely. For sure, creating things, making things. Did you ever read that story that I sent you?
I just found it. You just mentioned it. I just pulled it up actually. Yes.
Oh, cool.
I'm going to read it. You know what?
It's set in
we should have
Milwaukee.
brought it and done like we should have workshopped it on the air.
Oh, yes. Oh, and we only have 6 minutes. We'll have to do
All
it
right, we'll
next
come back. We'll do it. We'll workshop your story.
Yeah, we should work that up my story. People loved
On
that
air.
story, and people hated that story.
But see, dude, I think that's important. I think I would rather have that than someone read something I've written and just be completely ambivalent about
Yeah,
it.
you don't want
I'd
that
rather
at
have
all.
people
That's-
that like what I've done or not like, instead of just kind of. I hear like nowadays I hear a lot of music on the radio, and you're like,
Right.
it's just sort
Yeah.
of noise, or
It
it's
is
not
a lot of
something that
noise.
moves me. But I'd rather have stuff that I just, intensely love or hate.
Mhm.
I think that at least moves you in one direction.
Yeah. Either.
And
yeah.
so maybe your story's working if that's the case.
It must have been at some way. It was
I
doing
think great
something.
literature. I mean, any piece of great fiction,
Mhm.
changes you in the act of reading it, and so maybe that's how it's working.
Yeah,
Yes.
maybe we'll find out. It's an old story.
All right. Well, I'm going to read it next time we talk. We're going to talk about that.
Yeah, we should. It's called "The Escape of the Peg-Leg Monkey."
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also been you treated that also in visuals too before. haven't
Yeah,
you?
the Peg-Leg Monkey recurs
He's like
a
a
lot.
recurring character for you.
Yeah, well, and all my stories take place in Milwaukee.
Oh, well, there you go. So there is Milwaukee fiction happening.
Yeah, there is. And in the same vein we're talking about, the magical realism. I actually call it cartoon
You should make
plasticism.
this available to the people who are listening to this. You should put
You're
it somewhere
right.
in the show notes.
I should. In the show notes, I definitely will put it in there. I'll put a link to the Scribd file.
Yeah, do that, man. That's fantastic. We can all read it, and then we can all talk about it on,
Whoa,
on
we
your
could
Facebook.
have
On your Facebook.
This sounds
Image
like
for
I'm
Hire.
asking for punishment. That would be fabulous. Yeah, definitely we should do that.
All right.
I will definitely put it on the Facebook. Let's do another reading, as long as we have time.
What do you want to know?
What do you want to know? I want to see the pip cards work is what I want to know.
Let's put them all together.
Yeah, can we get some sound on that shuffle?
I bet I can fake it.
Yeah, okay, that's a good fake job. Nice.
Because, see, man, they're too small and thick to do that kind of I just sort of, like, whisk them around like this.
Yeah, they're hard. You can't really shuffle them like casino
No.
cards. You have
They're
to sort of
bulky.
like mix them up. In a way.
What's in store for your next show? That's what we'll find out.
Oh, yeah, I'll be talking to my Navy buddy, Rad.
What are you guys talking about?
I don't know. Rad's a kook.
Nice.
He's a great guy. He's very involved in gun rights, and he spent a lot of time in Indian sweat lodges in Detroit.
Oh, wonderful.
Changed his life, so we'll be talking about that.
Have you ever done that?
No, I can't find any. Well, I haven't really looked very hard either, but I don't even know where to look.
I don't know of any of those either, so.
Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome?
I would love to do that, actually.
Yeah.
I know someone that's done those.
Really?
Yeah.
In
My
Milwaukee?
friend who's the Jungian, the analyst guy I've told
Well,
you about.
we got to get that guy.
He would-
Oh, what's
he'd
that?
come.
Okay, so we're dealing now.
All right, so interestingly enough, even though we added the other 58 cards,
We got all trump cards.
we have all trump cards. We have Force, the World, or Le Monde, and we have the Wheel of Fortune.
Oh, and those, I always consider those two cards counterparts.
Yeah.
So the first one,
They're all
Force.
circular, first of all.
Wait,
Force
that's-
is
isn't that also called Strength? Rider Waite calls
it
that
is
Strength.
it is in the Rider Waite. Basically, it's a woman prying open the mouth of a lion, and
Yeah, and it's
she has this very regal sort of hat on her head. It almost looks like Sherlock Holmes' hat.
oh, a deer. Really?
Look at that.
It does look like that with an eyeball on top.
Right. I don't even know if we had a question for this, did we?
Oh, yeah. What was in store for the next show?
I think you're gonna have to be forcing what's his name, Brad.
Rad.
Brad to talk, maybe.
Oh no, he talks.
Maybe you
He's
have to be trying
loquacious.
to force him not to talk. Maybe keep him reined in.
I might have to
You
rein him in.
harness Brad.
Rad. R-A-D.
What's his name, Rad?
Yeah, Rad.
Harness Rad.
It's short for Radic.
Oh,
You shorten everybody's name,
and
The world.
the world is probably the breadth of the conversation.
Could be. He lives
And,
in Saipan.
Yeah, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to
And-
keep things moving, keep it spinning. The Wheel
With
of
the wheel-
Fortune's interesting. There's these weird little half horse, half person king on top.
Yeah, and isn't
Going in
Anubis in there too?
The what?
Anubis? I always thought the
Could be
dog-headed
Anubis.
person
It's
was
different in this one. Look
Oh,
how
wait,
strange
is it
looking
really?
it is.
Oh, wow, yeah. You have on the right, you have a king on top and a weird person with no legs on the left and a dog. Oh, it's time for me
It's
to
all
cut
absurd.
it. And we are out. Thank you for listening to Image for Hire. We'll be on the same time next week at WXRWLP 104.1 Milwaukee. To hear past episodes, visit riverwestradio.com/shows and click Image for Hire.
That was weird.